Hi, everybody. Today's Monday, November 25th, and Paul Carrick Roberts is here with us. Welcome back, Paul.
Hello, Nima.
Paul, let's get started with the new administration. Trump administration is being formed right now. He's picking his people to be part of his administration. Before going to Donald Trump and his policies, when it comes to the Middle East, there is a long-term strategy in the Middle East. I'm going to play a clip that Nixon is talking about the relationship between the United States and Israel. And I want to know what's your take on his type of thinking toward Israel, and is it going to be the case for the Trump administration? Let me play it for you.
Whether I felt it. The fact is that American Jews support Israel, and I understood that. And the fact is that every Jewish prime minister that I have known has enlisted American Jews to bring as much pressure as possible in the political process on American presidents. That's understandable. I don't object to it. Now, a president must not go along with it on occasion, because let me explain something about what is called the Jewish lobby in this country. In the first place, Jews, understandably in the United States, because of what happened in World War II, because of the Holocaust, are going to put first priority on the survival of Israel. Now, as good Americans as they are, they believe that America's survival and security is directly related to Israel's. In other words, their belief is that being for Israel first means that does not mean you're putting America second, because they think it goes together. An American president, however, has to approach it in a different way, in my opinion. He's got always to think first of what is best for America, and that's true whether it has to do with the Israelis or whether it has to do with the Irish or the Germans or what have you, or the Poles, etc. Usually what is best for America is also best for Israel and vice versa. But on occasions, for example, an American president must make a decision that does not in effect give the Israelis a blank check. And one example of that is a decision that I made. I decided early on in our administration that we were going to seek good relations with Egypt and others of Israel's neighbors. Many of my Israeli friends didn't like that because they wanted a special relationship with Israel and Israel only. But I have always said that Israel's interests are better served to have the United States a friend of Israel's neighbors and potential enemies than to leave a vacuum which the Soviet Union would fill. I still believe that, and I think that should be American policy today.
Paul, it was when you look at the way that he's talking about, it's unbelievable how direct and correct he is right now with the current situation of the relationship between the United States and Israel. Is Donald Trump going to consider any of these talks from Nixon?
I have no idea. Since Nixon's time, the power of the Israel lobby has grown. Some would say dramatically. And the Israeli government receives enough money every year from the United States to purchase our elections. So it's impossible to be a member of the House of Representatives or a member of the Senate and not represent Israel's interest. You may know there is one member, I don't remember if it's the House or the Senate, there's one member, and he constantly makes the point that every member except him of the United States Congress has an Israeli keeper who watches over what he says, what he does, what he supports, and imposes discipline that Israel requires. Well, there's no reason for this member of the Congress to be saying this, unless it's true, because it doesn't earn him any brownie points. It just makes him a target for attack. He's said to be an anti-Semite and so on and so on. So when you have a president, whether it's Trump or whoever, and he's confronted with the Congress, you have to remember it was not but a few months ago that Netanyahu, the Israeli prime minister, who was engaged in what the Israeli government itself seemed to describe as the genocide of Palestine, the very person heading this genocide campaign is invited to the Congress to speak and is given 53 standing ovations. Well, it's kind of hard to believe, but you can see the constraint that Trump, whatever his own opinion and his own intentions are, the constraint Trump faces is powerful. In fact, if you look at Trump's appointments in the military and foreign affairs area, if you look at his Secretary of Defense, his national security advisor, his ambassador to the United Nations, his ambassador to Israel, his envoy to the Middle East, they are all Zionists, committed to the defense of Israel, and every one of them is prepared to go to war with Iran. They say this themselves. I'm simply reporting what's everywhere in the media. So quite clearly, Trump was afraid to put anyone anywhere in military or foreign affairs that would be prepared to put pressure on Israel to moderate so that some kind of agreement can be reached to stop the conflict in the Middle East, which has the same potential as the one in Ukraine, to explode out of control. So that tells me that Trump isn't prepared to take any actions other than those that serve Israel's interest.
In these policies that you're mentioning, is it going to help Israelis to capture the West Bank, even Gaza, the northern part of Gaza? How do you see that?
Well, I think the Israeli government, Netanyahu, and the Israeli media have made it clear that this is the end of Palestine. There will be no more Palestine, not in Gaza, not in the West Bank. If there's any Palestine, it will be in refugee camps in Lebanon or Jordan or wherever they get put. There's already been pressure from Israel on the United States and or Europe to take the Palestinians in as refugees. So I think that it's a foregone conclusion that the intent of Israel is no more Palestinians, period. This seems to be in agreement with the ambassador that we have sent to Israel, or rather that Trump will be sending to Israel, Huckabee, because he has said that Israel has the title to Palestine. So that excludes the Palestinians from being there because the title is Israel's. So I think we are seeing the final erosion of Palestine. You know, Palestine has been disappearing bit by bit, year by year, since 1947. There are maps available online at different dates. showing what initially was Israel and Palestine and how it has changed over time so that essentially Palestine disappeared except for Gaza and a few places in the West Bank that really aren't even connected to each other. So that was at the beginning of this current Israeli assault on Palestine. And though it's not reported in the media, the assault also includes the remaining Palestinian villages in the West Bank. They're being emptied, just like Gaza. So I think that Palestine will no longer exist. It's essentially gone, and I don't see anyone anywhere doing anything to prevent it. Clearly, the United States government, both parties, are in support of the weapons that the Israelis are using to destroy the Palestinian population. And they're also using starvation, disease, polluted water, all the rest. I think the population essentially is seriously sick, ill. There are no medicines, there are no hospitals. They're probably so ill they're going to just die from the malnutrition and the infectious diseases. It may not even be necessary for Israel to continue slaughtering them and bombing them and all the rest. So what can Trump do about it? Nothing. The whole thing will be over with probably in 2 months. I mean, how can the Palestinians exist? Just think about it. There's no power, there are no hospitals, there are no medicines, there's no food, there's no portable water. It's just really hell. It's just hell on earth. And nobody does anything, and not even the Arabs, not even the Muslims, and not even Hezbollah or Iran. The world has accepted the extermination of the Palestinians. I think it's over with.
But when we remember the first term of Donald Trump, he was able to annex Jerusalem, the eastern part of Jerusalem, and to Israel. But right now, the situation is totally different, Paul. As you know, we had some sort of rapprochement between Iran and Saudi Arabia. Turkey has cut all its ties with Israel, still letting the Azerbaijani oil to get to Israel. But that would be the next step. I don't know if they would consider that. Donald Trump, do you think that Donald Trump is that powerful in terms of what's going on, the real face of the Middle East right now? Or is he going to face some sort of resistance from the governments, from the countries in the West Asia in terms of what's going on in Israel? They're not going to let him to do whatever Israelis want to do.
Well, the Israeli target is Iran. And the Israeli agenda is Greater Israel, which Netanyahu himself held up a map showing Israel is from the Nile to the Euphrates. And then maybe a month ago, if that long, one of the Israeli ministers said, actually, Greater Israel is larger. It now includes Saudi Arabia. So that may explain the Saudis getting closer to Iran and conducting joint military exercises. But what it comes down to is Iran and Russia. It doesn't make much difference what Israel or the United States thinks. The question is, will Putin let us attack Iran? Putin has said he won't. The question is, will people believe him? I don't think Putin can afford Iran to be destroyed like Iraq was, or like Libya was, or like President Obama intended for Syria to be. Because Iran protects Russia from the CIA being able to send in its jihadist mercenaries into Russia, into the Muslim areas, and cause destabilization, the way the United States tried in Chechnya a few years ago. So I think Iran is off limits for an American and Israeli attack. The Israelis don't accept that and continue to try to get American cooperation in an attack on Iran. Now, it may be too late. We may remember the last Israeli attack on Iran. Their aircraft were unable to enter Iranian territory. They would have been blown out of the sky. So they had to launch their weapons from Iraqi airspace. And it appears that almost all these weapons that they launched were intercepted, because it seems that the Iranians have the Russian S-400 air defense system. And I don't think the Israelis or even the United States have anything that can penetrate that. So it could well be that Iran is now a difficult military target. And also, we know that the Iranians have the capability of penetrating Israel's Iron Dome. So it may well be that that situation militarily is not the easy one that the Israelis were counting on, and the American warmongers were counting on. And that itself may stop it. We have to also keep in mind that the real conflict now is shaping up in Ukraine, because we've seen the utter, total stupidity and criminal insanity of the United States Secretary of State, the United States National Security Advisor, giving a green light to firing long-range missiles into Russia. And now we see the French president has joined this, giving a green light. And they've done this in the face of Putin's clear statement that this means you're at war with Russia. And they've done this in the face of the revision in Russian war doctrine that permits the use of nuclear weapons against non-nuclear countries that launch any kind of attack against Russia. And they're doing this despite the demonstration the other day of the new Russian intermediate range missile. This missile does not need nuclear warheads to destroy every NATO US military base in Europe and the Middle East in a matter of minutes. So if this missile is deployed in numbers, there's no capability of Ukraine, of Israel, the United States conducting a conventional war with Russia. It's just impossible. They would be immediately annihilated without use of nuclear weapons. So what would they do? I would imagine, to save face, the fools in Washington would want to launch ICBMs. It'd be the end of the world. So the situation on the ground, I think, has dramatically changed with this new Russian missile and with the air protection that Iran now has, and Iran's ability to directly attacked Israel. So we can keep our fingers crossed that Putin tolerates the provocations coming from Washington until Trump gets in office and waits to see, can Trump bring the West to its senses and solve this in some way that acknowledges the Russian point of view. You know, so far, the West lives in its own propaganda and it sees the world through its own lies. And as the French foreign minister said today or yesterday, we have to stop Russia right there, but otherwise they'll soon have all of Europe. Well, of course, Russia has no intention of overrunning Europe. What do they want Europe for? You know, they're focused on BRICS, on the Silk Road. They're on their own developments in Siberia, on Africa. They have no interest in conquering Europe. I mean, what would they want with it? I mean, what's it good for? I mean, it's overrun with refugees from third world countries. It's turning into a Tower of Babel. You know, the last thing Russia wants is more problems or occupation. You know, there's no sign of Putin constructing an army large enough to occupy Europe. He says over and over, no conscription, no conscription. The Russian army is really not that large. It's plenty large enough to deal with Ukraine, but it's not a force that's being developed to conquer Europe or anybody for that matter. You know, Putin has steadfastly refused for 3 years to conquer Ukraine. He keeps saying this is a limited military operation confined to Donbass, that we are expelling the Ukrainians from the Russian areas that have been reabsorbed in Russia. My criticism of him for 3 years has been that this was a mistake because it let, by not taking Kiev out of the war, he left him there to continue it. And the continuation of it has let the West get so involved that it's now widening and becoming a major war. We are on the verge of a major war. The only thing that's going to prevent a major war, it's not going to be Washington. Those stupid fools are sending missiles into Russia. It's going to be Putin holding his patience, keeping his patience, waiting to see if a new American regime can come to its senses. That's the only thing at the moment preventing the outbreak of a major war. It's the patience of Putin. If he loses his patience, what the West and Washington are doing are going to directly cause a major war. And so if you look at the world in this way, Israel, I mean, it's of no consequence. It's a war criminal nation. It's the International Criminal Court has arrest warrants out for Netanyahu and the former defense minister. They are defined, they have been indicted as war criminals. That is, they have the same status as the Nazis at Nuremberg. Now, we see the Americans, stupid as they are in Washington, saying they're going to put sanctions on any country that helps the ICC bring the Israelis to justice. Well, that makes us complicit with war criminals. So the United States is losing its aura of being some sort of a moral force. It's committed to the protection of war criminals. Well, when your reputation is shattered, so is your power. And that's what Washington's doing to itself. And so, as I see it, we're on the edge of a final war breaking out. And the only thing preventing it at the moment is the patience of Vladimir Putin. And we have to pray his patience holds. And that when Trump gets there, he's capable of understanding that Russia's demands about Ukraine are non-negotiable. They simply have to be accepted. They're not going to give back territory that is now part of Russia. They're not going to accept Ukraine in NATO. They're not going to accept Ukraine's ability to continue any kind of war. They're not going to accept the continuation of a hostile government in Ukraine. It's just not going to happen. So the challenge for Trump is to show that peace is the accomplishment, not victory over Russia, which is unobtainable. He'll have to define this as peace. We've made mistakes. The mistakes we've made are life-threatening to the planet. We've got to correct this by securing peace. That's the task. Now, can he perform it? Or is he does he bluster too much? Does he rely on force too much? Will he be worried that the media will say it's an American defeat? He just has to accept it if it's an American defeat. He has to say, no, it's a victory for peace. We're not giving the Russians anything they haven't already taken. We know we can't take it back unless we go to nuclear war, in which we won't be here. There's nothing to be gained. What do we gain from peace? Then he can show all the gains from peace. So that's the challenge. And it seems that there's no one currently in any Western government, other than maybe the one in Hungary, that has any comprehension of this. They all want more war. Imagine Britain, France, I mean, their military capability is practically zero, and they want to go to war with Russia. This is why I say these people are insane. You have to be insane. They're not just making a mistake. All right, so that's my description of the problem.
Yeah, Trump has chosen Sebastian Gork as senior director for counterterrorism. Here is what he said about Russia, Paul.
That the president has mentioned. He will say to that murderous former KGB colonel, that thug who runs the Russian Federation, you will negotiate now, or the aid that we have given to Ukraine thus far will look like peanuts. That's how he will force those gentlemen to come to an arrangement that stops the bloodshed.
Whoever that moron was is insane. Completely insane. Has he been appointed to the Trump administration?
Yeah, he's gonna be a senior director for counterterrorism.
Well, the guy's a complete insane maniac. He'll get the whole world blown up. I mean, if these low-grade morons like that guy are being appointed by the Trump administration, there's no hope. I mean, this all, if the Russians see that, what the hell are they going to think? Why wait on Trump? He's already made himself helpless. You can't put people in office like that and expect to overcome the serious problems that the United States and NATO have brought to the world. Russia's not responsible for the Ukraine conflict. It was orchestrated by the United States. It was the United States that overthrew the democratic elected government in Ukraine, that imposed the neo-Nazi regime, that deceived Putin for 8 years with the Minsk agreement, while the United States built up an army to send into Donbass to reconquer the breakaway republics. Putin had no alternative than to go to the protection of the Russian people in Donbass. You know, all Donbass was part of Russia. During the Soviet era, when there was no difference between Russia and Ukraine, it was all the Soviet Union. For political and administrative reasons, Soviet leaders attached Donbass to Ukraine. And then later in 1956, Khrushchev attached Crimea to Ukraine. Crimea had been a part of Russia for 3 centuries. The Russians took it from the Muslims, I think in 1700. So this is a Russian culture. They speak the Russian language. They're Russian people. And you can't expect Putin to stand aside while they're slaughtered. He made every effort to get a mutual security agreement with the West. Remember, the end of 2021, the beginnings of 2022, he and Lavrov were doing everything they could with Washington, with NATO, with the European Union to get a mutual security agreement. He got the cold shoulder. This entire conflict is entirely the fault of Washington. The Russians have no responsibility for this. This was the neoconservatives in pursuit of their agenda of world hegemony, thinking if they start a war there and they drag Putin into it, that will undermine him at home, and he will lose power, and they will be able to break up the Russian Federation just like they broke up the Soviet Union. That's the origin of this whole conflict. And there's no recognition of this. The Western people, the Western leaders, they've created a false narrative, and now they believe their own propaganda. And you have this utterly ignorant fool, the French foreign minister, saying, oh, we have to stop the Russians in Donbass. They'll take all of Europe. I mean, they're victims of their own lies. So you can see it. I think it's going to be extremely difficult to avoid the utter destruction of the world. The Russians are not going to surrender. And if the West can't see its way to come to terms because it's a victim of its own lies, there can be no agreement to avoid war. You know, the West will test the waters. They'll fire the missiles further. They'll hit Moscow. There won't be any more patience from Putin. People need to understand this is extremely serious. The whole thing has been completely misrepresented. The people have no idea of the insanity and total stupidity of their leaders. You know, we've got U.S. senators, they're ready to go to war with Russia, China, and Iran at the same time. I mean, what are they thinking? They're going to win? I mean, and this clip you just showed, whoever this moron was, I mean, the guy had got enough sense to justify his existence. He's a threat to life on Earth. If these are Trump appointees, it's over with. It's finished. I mean, Putin's wasting his time being patient.
Here is what he said about the Middle East, Paul.
Administration swinging sanctions that brought the regime practically to the brink of economic collapse, and that's when the people can take over. In the meantime, the International Court of Human Rights has put out a warrant for Bibi Netanyahu and his Minister of Defense because Jews, right? Jews. How interesting that the Arab wife of George Clooney was heavily involved in that decision. The left, they're the anti-Semites. No, sorry. They're the Jew haters. Just look at the campuses across America. Look at the squad. We stand by you, Israel. Do what needs to be done, especially when it comes to the biggest sponsor of state terrorism, Iran. God bless. Tune in tonight. Amazing.
He wants to war. He wants a war with Iran. He wants a war with Russia if they cannot abide by what Donald Trump wants them to do. And at the end of the day, we're hoping that Donald Trump gonna come out of this, because these people who are gonna talk are gonna give him the way that they're thinking. They're gonna. It's unbelievable how he's picking these people. Who's responsible, Paul, in your opinion, for picking these people?
Netanyahu. Are you sure? What is this guy's name? What's this guy's name?
It's Sebastian Gorka.
What?
Sebastian Gorka. He's a British, Hungarian, and naturalized American.
And Trump has appointed him to what position?
Senior Director for Counterterrorism.
It's insanity, and it convinces me that there's no hope in the Trump administration. That does it. That somebody that insane and ignorant, the ignorance is overwhelming. And Trump appoints him. There's no hope.
Because
there's no hope. I mean, you know, it looks worse than the Biden idiots. And I didn't think anybody could be as crazy as they are or as mentally insane. I mean, how can you have a Secretary of State and a National Security Advisor who, despite the Russian government telling you, you send missiles into Russia, you're at war with us, and then they go ahead and send the missiles? I mean, this is insanity, and no sane person could make that decision. Two people decide to take the West to war with Russia. Well, who do they think they are? They're playing with the lives of humanity. I mean, I think this is beyond evil. I mean, it's so sick and vile. There's no realization. of reality. You see, look, Nima, this is a serious situation. The entire leadership of the entire Western world is in total denial of reality. So how can there be any hope?
I think right now the leadership, yeah, go ahead.
There's not one word of this in the print, TV, media, NPR. You know, there are a few programs like yours, like the Judge Napolitano. There are a handful of online journalists. That's it.
The leadership, I was talking with Professor Marandi in Iran. The leadership in Iran is so confused because right before 2024 presidential election, Trump had an interview. I think I played a clip of him talking about Iran. He said the only concern he has about Iran is the nuclear program of Iran. And if the concern is the nuclear program, he wants some sort of negotiation, some sort of agreement on the nuclear program of Iran. When the leadership, look at the leadership in Russia, they're talking about negotiation for more than 2 years of this conflict. Every time they're talking about negotiations, not the Western countries. They're losing, the Western countries are losing in Ukraine, and they're not accepting any sort of negotiations. And right now, they're totally confused with this new administration. Everybody, when you look at the administration, it's a variety of people who are totally against Russia, China, Iran, Middle East. Let's go to war. And what's the change to Washington? Who's going to change the policies in Washington?
It doesn't look like anyone. No one's going to change it. And I think once it's clear to Putin that no one's going to change it, he's run out of patience. And the Western world is not a military match for Russia, China, Iran. It's hopeless. And unless Putin's humanitarian concerns overwhelm him and cause him to make a strategic blunder, he could probably wipe out the United States before the missiles could be fired. These new missiles can be fired from subs off the coast. In 1 or 2 minutes, there wouldn't be any American ICBMs left. It's like I say, these people are insane. They don't accept reality. They are lost in lies and myths. They think they're invincible. There's a huge amount of hubris and arrogance. It's incomprehensible. It's incomprehensible. And where are leaders, you see? Assuming Tulsi Gabbard can get appointed as a national intelligence director, I mean, assuming, which is unclear, what can she do? It's
surrounded by all these people. And on the other hand, we can hope on is Donald Trump's ability to fire people. I think that would be a game changer. All of it. With boldness.
What they're going to do is convince him that he has to be the tough guy, and that it's the tough guy who wins the argument. I mean, Trump already thinks that, the art of the deal. His excuse for appointing people who are hostile to our opponents is that it intimidates the opponents and makes them more readily come to a deal. Well, if he thinks he's going to intimidate Putin, he's crazy. Or China, or Iran for that matter. It's not going to happen. And it's just going to get the world blown up. We're all going to be blown up because of these idiots, these criminally insane, sick, vile people who are playing Russian roulette with nuclear weapons. You know, what really disturbs me, Neimer, is that when Blinken and this National Security Advisor, Sullivan, I think his name is, when they gave the go-ahead for the missiles to be fired into Russia, no one said, hey, look, what are you doing, committing the world to nuclear war? You would have thought that leaders of governments all over the world would have been protesting. You would have thought every newspaper, every TV station, everything would have said, what are you doing? You're committing the world to nuclear war. Don't you understand what Putin told you? What are you doing? And there's not a word. No one protested. No one protested. Two low-grade morons starting war with Russia. Well, where's the hope?
Maybe Donald Trump can bring it with his people have been fired, these people who are not.
He'll have to fire almost all his appointments. I mean, the first time he appointed all his enemies, so he couldn't do anything. The second time, he's appointed every warmonger you can think of. Well, how do you get peace when your government is composed of warmongers? I mean, these people are worse than neoconservatives. You know, you think about it, maybe probably we're better off with Victoria Nuland. It's just really, I mean, I don't expect to live much longer. And I don't mean just because of my age. I mean, with these people going to be the government and Putin sitting there waiting to see if things will change, how can they change? The guy you ran those clips on, I mean, and all the rest, they want to go to war with Iran. And you know, look, just the other day, the Washington Post ran an editorial. I think I wrote about it. And the editorial says that failing to keep Donbass in Ukraine would be worse than going to a nuclear war. Well, how can it be worse? What can be worse than going to a nuclear war? I mean, and they write this, and they talk about it'll make us look weak. So looking weak is worse than having a nuclear war. And this is what the Washington Post's own editors wrote. So people say, oh, nothing's going to happen. Nothing's going to, of course something's going to happen. God.
Yeah.
Oh, you know, I'm sorry I agreed to this interview. I'm so damn upset. I'm going to have to have a couple of martinis.
Thank you so much, Paul, for being with us today. Great pleasure, as always. Happy Thanksgiving.
Well, maybe somebody will catch on. Let's keep our fingers crossed. Okay,
yeah.
Neimer.
Let's hope for a better future.
So
Bye-bye.
long.
Bye-bye.
Hey, Neimer, send me the URL.
Yeah, I'm going to send it to you. Yeah.
Okay.
Bye. Bye-bye.